Thanks, everyone. He plays these videos every time, and I have this joke prepared that, like, I'm the new pastor of the Grove, and I've taken over now, but he always has these videos ready, so I can't make that joke. But it's really good to be here with you guys today. I'm honored to be here and to be able to do this for the next 2 weeks. And I know what you guys are thinking, 2 weeks, really? I get to be here with you guys for 2 weeks. And so, like Derek said, today we're going to be talking about the patriarchs. But before we do, I have a story I want to tell you. So I'm a frequent at this Kroger right over here on Refugee, and I feel like I'm there almost every day. I go in there all the time. And there was one particular time I'm in Kroger over there, and I'm doing just some regular shopping, walking down the aisles, and I notice someone out of the corner of my eye just kind of watching me. And so, I'm doing my shopping, and I can sense this person just staring at me. And so, I kind of look over, and I see this older lady, she's just staring right at me, and I'm thinking, like, man, am I really that handsome? Like, I know I'm pretty good, but am I that? Thanks. No, but I see her staring at me, and so I decide to brush it off, and I get to thinking, like, maybe she's one of these undercover shoppers, and she thinks I'm stealing. And so I do my shopping, and the entire time she's following me up and down the aisles, but keeping a distance. And so I get all the things I need, and I make my way to the checkout, and I start buying my items, and finally she makes her way up to me, and I'm thinking, here we go. I'm about to be accused of stealing or something, and she comes up to me, and I turn to face her, and she begins to tell me that I look just like her son. I remind her so much of her son, and I'm thinking, okay, he must have been a good-looking dude, and so so I'm talking to her about this, and I begin to pick up that I think her son had maybe passed away. And so she was coming to me and saying, yeah, you look so much like my son. And every time I would talk to my son, when he would leave my house, or whenever I would leave him, he would always say, catch you later, Mom. Catch you later, Mom. And so this caught me off guard, but she asked me, she said, do you mind, could you just say that real quick? I'm thinking, okay, this is a little weird, but I didn't know what to do, so I obliged her. So I said, catch you later, Mom. And I thought that would be the end of it, but she keeps talking to me. So I'm checking my items out, and finally I'm done, and I'm trying to get out of this conversation. And so, I say, hey, it was great talking to you. I got to get home, and so I grab my stuff, and I'm making my way to my car, and she keeps following me. She keeps following me to my car, and so eventually I open the doors to my car, I put my stuff in, and as I'm getting in, as I'm trying to get into my car, she's trying to stop me. She's saying, no, there's just a couple more things I want you to say. And I'm telling her, at this time, I'm trying to be a little more stern with her. I'm saying, I'm sorry, but I have to get home. I cannot say these things. And so I'm getting into my car, and she actually begins to pull on me to stop me from getting into my car. So she's pulling, and as I'm trying to get in, and she starts pulling my leg. Right? She is pulling my leg just like I'm pulling yours. It didn't happen. It's a fake story. Here's the thing, though. I know I had some of you go in there for a second. And you're actually the point of my sermon today. You're the point of my sermon today. Because here's the thing. Is as people, we love stories. We love stories. That is how we communicate with one another. And so as we get into Hebrews chapter 11, and we get down to verse 8, and the preacher, the author of Hebrews, he's getting to the good stories. He is getting to the good stuff. He is getting to the guys where that every Israelite man, woman, and child, they would have known these stories. So when the author, when he talks about names like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, these names they invoke great stories. They invoke lessons and memories of people telling them these things before. And so today, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Abraham and Abraham's story, right? And I'm telling you, in the Old Testament, there's a handful of guys that it's like when you're listening to their stories, you're just thinking, wow. I mean, I think of Moses and Elijah, but then, man, Abraham, he is like the man when it comes to stories. And just like the beginning of every good story, Abraham's kind of follows in a similar way. Abraham has this hero's journey, the beginning of his journey. One of my favorites is Lord of the Rings, and I think of Frodo Baggins and Samwise, right? Having to leave the Shire with the One Ring to go take it on an amazing journey. I think of another one of my favorites, Star Wars, right? Luke Skywalker. The Empire comes and destroys his home, and he has to go on this hero's journey. He has to leave home. Abraham's story is very similar. It's a hero's journey, and it starts with him having to leave home. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8 says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going." Abraham's story, this is the hero's journey. I actually have my own running away story, and I promise this one's real. This is a real story. So I think I was probably around 12 or 13 years old, somewhere around there, and I know I was the age where it's like I finally realized I knew more than my parents, and so I decided one day, and I grew up in a similar way, probably like you, where I had been instilled with this mindset that as long as you live under my roof, you're going to follow by my rules. I'm sure some of you were told that the same thing, and I was raised with that lesson. And there was one day where I just said, you know what? I don't want to follow the rules anymore, so I'm not going to live under this house, right? So I packed up all of nothing that I had, and I decided, okay, this is it. I'm going to begin my own hero's journey. I'm going to run away from home. So I can remember I opened the door and I make my way out. And at the beginning, I'm feeling really good about this decision. And I'm thinking, okay, this is where it all begins. And so I take a couple steps, and I begin thinking, okay, still feeling good and walking a little bit more. Now I'm thinking, I probably could have been a little nicer. I'm not always right. I'm beginning to hear the nature noises and the bugs and the wind and all this stuff, and I'm feeling a little nervous about it. And so I take a couple more steps, and now I'm thinking, I'm wrong a lot. I don't always get it right. Maybe my parents do know something, and now it's really starting to hit me. I'm in the wilderness of my front yard. And my running away story, it didn't really last long, because a couple minutes later I made my way into the house, and I'm probably asking my mom what's for dinner. Here's the thing. Leaving home is no easy task. It's not. In fact, it really goes against all conventional wisdom we have. Right? I've heard this before, that home is where the heart is. Right? Home is where you feel secure. It's where you belong. It's where there are people who love you and care about you, and they want to take care of you. Leaving home is no easy task. Church, there's three things that I think Abraham's story can teach us about faith. And after all, that's what Hebrews chapter 11 is about. It's about faith. And I think if we read Abraham's story, there are particularly three things I think we can get. And the first one is that faith requires obedience. Faith requires obedience. right? We have to understand that God's ways, they are so much better than our ways. That from the very beginning, even back when Abraham was alive, he has always known better. He has known what to do. I think of a passage, and you've probably heard this passage before. It comes from Isaiah chapter 55. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." I find it so significant that in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, when the author, when he's reminding us of Abraham's story, he just says, "And Abraham went out." We're not told that there was any arguing. We're not told that there was any hesitation, or that Abraham he thought he would sit on it for a couple days. Maybe there were a couple questions he needed to ask. We're not told any of that. Rather, we're told that Abraham went. And here's the deal: is the Lord did not tell Abraham where he was going, but that he would be the one to guide him there. It all relied on the Lord. And it was only up to Abraham to obey, right? Genesis 12, again, it simply tells us Abram went. He obeyed the promise that God was going to provide a land, a descendant, and a people. That was the promise that God made to Abraham. Right? And Abram, he didn't need things to be his way. It didn't have to be according to his schedule. He was obedient. He decided, "Okay, Lord, whatever you say, that is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to trust that you are the one leading me there." Church, if we are looking to increase our faith in God, we must learn to be obedient. We must learn to be obedient. All right, we have to be willing to take our hands off of the wheel and to let Him be the one to guide us. Psalm chapter 119, this is verses 104 through 106. It says, through your precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way. Right, and you may have heard this before. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. I have sworn an oath and confirmed it to keep your righteous rules. Your word is a lamp unto my feet, and it is our job to be obedient, to follow that light that He provides. If we keep going, we pick up Abraham's story in verse 9, and I got to spoil it for you. God is faithful to the promises He made, but I'm sure that's no surprise to anyone, right? I just want to read for us real quick. So God, He shows Abram the land He promised in Canaan, right? Hebrews chapter 11, this is starting in verse 9. It says, by faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Right? He is also faithful to the promise that He is going to give Abraham and Sarah a descendant, a child. Right? And so Sarah gives birth at the youthful age of 90 years old. It says, by faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Right? And God is also, He is faithful to His promise of a people, of a lineage, of descendants. Out of people that are obedient, but at times not so obedient. This is picking up in verse 12. It says, therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. All of these promises, God is faithful to what it is that He has told Abraham. However, we have a slight problem. The author rightly notes that Abraham, and even some of his offspring, even some of his children, his descendants, they did not live long enough to see all of these things come to fruition. Abraham and even some of his descendants, they did not get to see the fulfillment of all of these promises. Pastor Derek and I, we kind of sat down and did the math, just kind of quick little mental math about it. And if Abraham, he dies in Genesis 25, we're not really introduced to the fullness of the Hebrew people until the beginning of Exodus, right, when they're all in Egypt. And then it's towards the middle of Joshua that the Israelites finally go into the land of Canaan and conquer it, right? And they are able to take the promised land, right? And so I want to say it was like around 740 years between the time that God made this promise to Abram until Joshua finally, man, he gets to see the final fulfillment of these promises that were made to Abram. But Abram's still there, right? He still had a life to live. And as Abram as he's living his life, you got to think, man, he didn't get to see all these things come to fruition. I mean, surely that would have been maybe a little discouraging. Or maybe he would have had his doubts, like, God, is this really going to happen? Because pretty soon I'm done here. And there are still things to be fulfilled. Church, I think that's a feeling, a situation that I think all of us know all too well. We'll get to that. If anyone had a reason to quit the journey, it would have been Abraham. Right? If there is anyone in the Bible who had a reason to quit, it's Abraham. Right? I think about his story, about how he finds trouble in Egypt. He has to go, create this army, build this army, and go rescue his nephew Lot. He sees Sodom destroyed. He's asked to offer his only son as a sacrifice. If I were Abraham, I probably would have stopped in Egypt, right? That's when my journey would have been over, right? But you got to think, surely there were times when Abraham wanted to quit, when he wanted to turn back and go home. Here's the second thing I think we can learn through Abraham's story about faith, is that faith requires perseverance. Faith requires perseverance. I got another story I want to tell you. Again, I promise this one's real. A couple weeks ago in Arkansas, they just got hit with quite a bit of snow. I think I heard like anywhere from 11 inches to like 16 inches, maybe in Missouri, like towards Joplin. But back home, I think we got about a foot of snow in Arkansas. And a lot of people say like they don't really think that down in the South, down in Arkansas, that we get a lot of snow, but sometimes we really do. Sometimes we get hit pretty hard. And I can remember I was a kid, I was probably around 10 or 11, when we had a pretty big snowstorm. And my family, my mom and my stepdad, they live on a hill, and so we have a driveway that's about a quarter mile, and it goes down the hill and it kind of winds around, and it's about a quarter mile to our mailbox. And so when it snows and gets icy, we can't really get cars up on the hill. It's just too slippery. And so there was one weekend where my dad was coming to pick my brother Nate and I up to go to his house. And my mom told us, she says, hey, I want you to get all bundled up, get your layers on. Your dad's coming to pick you up for the weekend. But he can't get up the hill. So he's going to park down by the mailbox, and you and your brother are going to walk to go meet him. So, I mean, that's a quarter mile. I'm probably like 10 or 11, and it's getting dark early. And growing up, I was terrified of Bigfoot. And my mom and my stepdad, they live kind of out in the woods. And So I was terrified of Bigfoot, and so going out in the dark and in the cold, I'm like terrified. And so my brother Nate and I were walking to the mailbox and trudging through the snow, and the entire time I'm thinking, there is something out in these woods that wants to get me right now. There's probably multiple things that just want to grab me by the ankles and drag me, right? So Nate and I were heading to the mailbox, and right as we're about to get there, with this knowledge that our dad is by the mailbox, right? That is what my mom has promised me. So we're getting pretty close to the mailbox, and all of a sudden, my brother Nate and I, we hear this growling, like this deep growls. I hear that, and I book it. I am running as fast as I can back to my house, right? And I'm crying, and I am just weeping, and I'm trying to run through all this snow. And, I kind of look to my side, and Nate's not there. He's not running next to me, and so I'm thinking, all right, the wolf got him, and so that probably gives me a couple minutes to run ahead, But quickly I'm like, wait, Nate's not with me? And so I turn around to see where Nate is, and he's just standing there. He's kind of smiling to himself, chuckling, and he's saying, Kellen, like, stop. Well, come to find out, my dad was hiding behind some trees, and he thought it would be really funny to make these growling noises to try and scare my brother and I. And actually, I know he's listening to this right now, so thank you, Dad. That was a growing moment for me. No, but something I find so significant about that story is that, Nate wasn't scared. My brother Nate, he knew the challenges. He knew we would have to make our way through the snow. He knew, he heard the growling just like I did, and he stuck with it. He had perseverance that I simply did not have. I think much like my brother Nate, Abraham understood he couldn't turn back. There was a promise to be fulfilled. I can't go home. I think he had faith. Obviously, he had faith. That past the obstacles, past the battles, past the trials and tribulations, there was a promise to be fulfilled. Church, I think we walk in that same tension today. Hebrews, it speaks to our situation now. How even as people who come after Abraham, even as people who come after Jesus, we are still seeking a promise, a home. Right? But our home isn't one like Abraham's. It's not here on earth. Our home is heaven. Our home is with God. And as we speak, we can have faith, we can persevere, knowing that that Christ has gone ahead of us and he is preparing a place for you and for me. But for the time being, while we are still here, it takes perseverance. We have to have faith and we have to persevere. It takes walking through the snow. It takes leaving home sometimes, trusting that in the end, there is something better to come. For some of us, one of the reasons we love stories is for the twist. We love those surprising twist endings, right? We love the I see dead people moments, right? Sixth Sense, anyone? So as our author, as the preacher, as he's recounting these stories in Hebrews chapter 11, he makes sure to mention the twist. Abraham on the mountain with Isaac. Right? The greatest twist in Abraham's story. And the author, he reminds us why this moment is so big. God had promised Abraham a son, and from that son there would be descendants, right? And Abraham, he kind of messes that up with his servant, and and Ishmael comes along, but God had promised your descendants are going to come through Isaac. Right? Genesis 21:12 says, "But God said to Abraham, 'Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named.'" And yet, God tells Abraham, "I want you to go up on the mountain, and I want you to offer up your son Isaac. I want you to offer him back to me." I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I could have taken that. That is a twist I'm not sure that I could have predicted, I could have seen through. Apparently, Abraham did. In Genesis 22, Abraham, he tells his company that he has gone with, he says he and Isaac are going to go up on the mountain, but that they will return. In Genesis 22, Abraham seems pretty certain that something is going to happen to where he and his son are going to walk back off of this mountain. Right? And the author of Hebrews, he confirms that. Right? In verse 19, I'm going to go ahead and read it. It says, "He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back." Right? Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19 tells us that, man, Abraham had faith. He trusted that, okay, even if I do have to sacrifice my son, God is going to have to raise him back from the dead. Because he made a promise to me. He made a promise that through Isaac, your offspring shall be named. The twist is revealed, though. Abraham he goes on the mountain, and he is getting ready to sacrifice his son. He's bringing the knife down, and the angel stops him. If you know the story, you know that then there is a ram who's caught in the thickets, and the ram is offered as a replacement to Isaac. But Abraham was going to do it. Scripture doesn't tell us that Abraham was like thinking about it. He's like, "God, stop me." Abraham was going to put the knife in his son. He was going to sacrifice him. Abraham's story, it brings me to I think the third thing we can learn about faith, which is that faith requires trust. Faith requires trust. Throughout Abraham's story, he has to place an immense amount of trust in God. However, in every situation, in every case, Abraham knew that putting his faith in God was going to lead to something better. I may have told some of you this. I feel like I share it all the time, but I hate flying. I hate it. There's just something about being like really high in the air that just freaks me out. I can't do anything. If the plane were to go down, if something were to happen, there's nothing I can do to control that situation. Right? So I'm 30,000 feet in the air, and I just have to trust. I just have to trust that the pilots, that the engineers, they know what they're doing. But when I get up there and I look out the window, I'm always reminded of just how beautiful it is. And how amazing God is that even though I see a six-foot point of view, that's how I live life. 6 feet off the ground. God has a 30,000-foot view of the world. He sees it all. He sees all the ways that life interconnects. He sees the threads moving. In the Bible, Job's story reminds us of this. It reminds us how God sees it all, how he governs the world. He governs what it is that he has created in a way that we just cannot even begin to wrap our minds around. And I see this in Abraham's story. That all of these things he had to go through, that God was weaving something beautiful. But it required trust. Abraham had to trust that God was going to do something great and that there was something better on the other side. In Hebrews chapter 11, there are more people mentioned, right? And I know that the sermon's supposed to be about the patriarchs, and we've really only talked about Abraham. But, I mean, the same is true of Isaac, of Jacob, of Joshua, right? Of Sarah. All of these people, they had to put an immense amount of trust in who God is and what he was doing. All these people trusted that even in the midst of trials and tribulation, faith in God would lead to a better tomorrow. I love stories. I really do. And I love this story. I love Abraham's story. It reminds me of how it is that I can have faith. Right? Stories, they remind us of how to grow, how to move forward. We follow after these guys. We follow after the patriarchs who remind us, who exemplify what it means to be faithful. They show us how to be obedient. They show us how to persevere, how to trust in God's faithfulness. And I'm kind of comforted that they're not perfect people, just like I'm not, just like you're not. But they have stories that we would be honored to emulate. Their faith is something that we would be honored to emulate. And ultimately, they remind us of the truth that we find ourselves in now. We can trust in tomorrow. We can trust in the God of tomorrow. Right? It is through Jesus, it is through Christ that we know what to expect. John 16:33 says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. I'm so comforted that Christ would come down, that he would submit himself even to the point of death on the cross, so that we could have hope in things that are yet unseen. That no matter how many trials, no matter how much tribulation would come our way, we know that in the end, our faith is leading to something better. And that through his blood, through his sacrifice on the cross, he is now preparing that for you and for me. Church, that is something I can put my faith in. That is something I can have obedience for. That is something I can persevere for. And that is something I can trust in. It's through Christ. It is through what he has done that I can have faith. Church, will you pray with me? Heavenly Father God, Lord, we come to you humbled. Lord, that you would sacrifice your Son. Lord, that he would submit himself to death on a cross so that we would be saved. Lord, and so now we just pray that you help us to put our faith in him. To put our faith in the fact that Lord, you are doing something good. God, it's something we can hope for. It's something that can give us the motivation and the courage to wake up day after day and keep going, to keep being obedient to what it is that you've called us to do. God, you are so great, and we thank you for this opportunity to come here together, to join as a church, and to have faith. Lord, we pray all this in your Son's name. Amen.